Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I was 9 years old when everything started. My family had lived in our quiet neighborhood for about 3 years at that point. My parents picked this place because it was safe, family friendly, and had a decent homeowners association that kept things looking nice without being too strict. At least that's what we thought. Growing up, I'd always loved small fluffy creatures. My mom said I used to beg for a pet rabbit every birthday and Christmas, but our landlord back then had a strict no pets policy. When we finally bought our house, I was still holding on to that dream of having a bunny friend someday. That's when the new family moved in across the street. They had a daughter who was exactly my age, and she had 2 pet bunnies. These weren't just any bunnies. They were the cutest, fluffiest little things I'd ever seen. One was white with brown spots, and the other was completely gray with the softest fur. The girl and I became fast friends. Her parents were super nice and didn't mind when I came over to play with the bunnies. Soon, other kids from the neighborhood started joining us. There was the boy from 2 houses down, the twins from around the corner, and even some of the older kids would stop by sometimes. We'd sit in their backyard feeding the bunnies carrots and lettuce, watching them hop around in their little pen. It was honestly the highlight of my day, every day. For 2 whole years this was our routine. After school, weekends, summer days, we'd all gather at the bunny house. The girls' parents even built a bigger outdoor area for the rabbits so they could have more space to run around. Everything was perfect. The bunnies were happy, we kids were happy, and even the parents seemed to enjoy watching us care for these little animals. But then he showed up to ruin everything. The guy lived right next door to the bunny family. I'd seen him around before, usually working in his garden or washing his car. He always seemed grumpy, never waved back when we said hello, and had this way of staring at people that made you feel like you were doing something wrong just by existing. My mom called him difficult, which I later learned was her polite way of saying he was a pain in the butt. One day I was over playing with the bunnies when I heard raised voices from next door. The girl's dad was standing by the fence looking frustrated, while Mr. Grumpy was waving some papers around. The grumpy neighbor was yelling about how the animals needed to go because he'd looked through the HOA rules and found that no non-domesticated pets were allowed. The girl's dad tried to argue that they were just rabbits and were pets, not wild animals. But the neighbor insisted that the rules didn't care what anyone thought they were, and that non-domesticated meant non-domesticated. He threatened to file a complaint with the board the next day. I didn't really understand what was happening, but I could tell it wasn't good. The girl looked scared and her mom came outside to see what the fuss was about. When she asked if there was a problem, the grumpy neighbor told her that the rabbits were against HOA regulations and needed to be removed immediately or they'd start getting fined. The girl's mom pointed out that they'd lived there for 2 years and asked why this was suddenly an issue now. The neighbor replied that he actually read the rules, unlike some people, and gave them 30 days to get rid of the bunnies or face the fines. That night at dinner, I told my parents what happened. My dad shook his head and said some people just like to cause trouble. My mom mentioned she'd heard the bunny family was planning to move back to where their extended family lived, but not for a few months. Over the next few weeks, things got tense. The grumpy neighbor kept complaining to the HOA board. He'd walk by the bunny pen and mutter under his breath. He even called animal control once, but they told him the rabbits were clearly pets and not his problem. The bunny family tried everything to make peace. They offered to build a taller fence so he couldn't see the rabbits. They promised to keep them inside more often. Nothing worked. This guy had decided these bunnies were his enemy, and he wasn't backing down. I watched the girl's dad try to reason with the neighbor one more time, explaining that they were trying to be reasonable and that the kids loved the rabbits, and they weren't causing any real problems. But the grumpy neighbor just kept saying that rules were rules, and he didn't care if the kids liked them. He told them to get rid of the rabbits or face the fines. The HOA board was split. Half of them thought the complaint was ridiculous, especially since the bunnies had been there for 2 years without any issues. But the other half felt like rules were rules, no matter how silly they seemed. Then one day, the girl came over to my house looking excited and a little mischievous. She told me they were moving the next week because her dad got a new job back home, and they decided to leave earlier than planned. When I asked about the bunnies and the HOA situation, she got this sneaky look on her face. She explained that her dad's friend lived out in the country and had tons of wild rabbits on his property. Her dad was planning to get a few of them and release them in the neighborhood right before they left. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but it sounded like some kind of plan to get back at the grumpy neighbor. The day before they moved, I watched from my bedroom window as the girl's dad carried a few carriers into the backyard. These weren't the pet bunnies, these were different ones, smaller and more energetic looking. He opened the carriers and let them loose in the neighborhood. Within hours, these wild rabbits had found the perfect spot to make their home: the grumpy neighbor's pristine backyard garden. This guy had spent years perfecting his outdoor space. He had fancy flowers, perfectly trimmed hedges, and vegetables growing in neat little rows. It was like something you'd see in a home and garden magazine. He was always out there watering, pruning, and making sure every plant was exactly where it should be. But rabbits don't care about perfect gardens. They just see a giant buffet. The next morning I woke up to yelling. The grumpy neighbor was screaming for someone to get the rabbits out of his yard, but there was nobody left to yell at. The bunny family had already moved out during the night, and the wild rabbits were just doing what wild rabbits do: eating everything green and making baby rabbits. Within a month, the rabbit population had doubled, then tripled. These weren't lazy pet bunnies that sat in a pen all day. These were wild rabbits with wild rabbit instincts, and they were living their best life in our neighborhood. The grumpy neighbor tried everything. He put up fences, but the rabbits dug under them. He used repellent spray, but it rained and washed it away. He called animal control, but they told him wild rabbits weren't their problem unless they were causing a health hazard. I overheard him complaining to an HOA board member about the rabbit infestation and demanding that the HOA do something about it. The board member explained that since he was the one who insisted on enforcing the pet rules, and these weren't pets anymore but wild animals, they weren't under HOA jurisdiction. When the neighbor protested that they were destroying his property, the board member told him that was between him and the wildlife department now. I watched him try to catch them himself. He'd be out there with a net, chasing rabbits around his yard while they hopped away like it was all a fun game. Sometimes I'd see him standing in his destroyed garden, hands on his hips, just staring at a family of bunnies munching on what used to be his prize-winning tomatoes. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood was actually enjoying the rabbits. Sure, they ate some plants, but most people thought they were cute. Kids would try to spot them in the morning before school. Some neighbors even started leaving out little piles of vegetables for them. When the months went by, the rabbit population kept growing. They'd taken over not just the grumpy neighbor's yard, but the entire neighborhood. You couldn't walk down the street without seeing at least 3 or 4 rabbits hopping around. The grumpy neighbor's beautiful garden became ground zero for rabbit activity. His perfect lawn turned into a series of small holes and bare patches. His vegetable garden became an all-you-can-eat rabbit restaurant. His flower beds turned into rabbit nurseries. After about a year of this, he seemed to give up the fight. He'd still grumble and complain, but he stopped trying to catch them. He stopped calling the HOA. He just accepted that his yard now belonged to the rabbits. That was 20 years ago. I'm 29 now, married, and I bought a house just 2 streets over from where I grew up. The rabbits are still there, still multiplying, still hopping around the neighborhood, still treating that guy's yard like their personal kingdom. The grumpy neighbor is still there too, now in his 70s and still living among his rabbit overlords. His garden never recovered. These days his yard is mostly dirt patches and rabbit holes, with a few stubborn weeds growing here and there. I used to work as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company. My territory covered 5 major cities, and I had to visit each one every month to meet with hospital administrators and department heads. The company set up my schedule so I'd fly out Monday night and come back Thursday night, spending 3 nights in hotels every single week. After doing this routine for about 2 years, I got smart about it. Instead of staying at random places, I picked the same hotel chains in each city. The company paid for everything anyway, so I figured I might as well rack up some rewards points. I signed up for every loyalty program I could find. By year 5, the staff at most of these hotels knew me by name. There was this one place in Chicago where they started calling one of their rooms my room because I stayed there so often. At another chain, I'd earned their top diamond status with over 750,000 points. When I called to make a reservation, they'd automatically bump me up to their presidential suite if it was available, or at least a master suite. The system worked perfectly for 8 years. I'd call 2 months ahead, book my usual rooms, and everything went smoothly. Then came that Monday in March when everything went sideways. I was heading to Atlanta for my quarterly meetings with 3 major hospital systems. There was some big medical conference happening that same week, which I knew about in advance. That's why I'd made my reservation 2 months early like always. When I walked into the hotel lobby with my suitcase, I immediately noticed a commotion at the front desk. A couple was having what looked like a heated discussion with the manager. I could hear the manager apologizing and explaining that the hotel was completely booked because of the conference that had filled up every hotel in the city. The male customer kept insisting that he'd called that morning and been told rooms were available. The woman with him was already getting loud and aggressive. She was pacing back and forth, waving her arms around and calling the whole situation bullshit. She accused the staff of lying and claimed it was discrimination. The manager kept trying to explain that he was showing no availability, but the woman wasn't buying it. She started yelling about how she knew they were holding rooms back and throwing around accusations of racism. The man kept asking to speak with a manager while the poor guy behind the desk kept explaining that he was the manager. This went on for about 15 minutes, with the woman getting louder and dropping F-bombs left and right. Finally, they gave up and started walking toward the exit. When they passed me, the man shook his head and told me not to even bother because the hotel was claiming they had no rooms. I walked up to the desk and the manager's face immediately brightened. He told me that my usual suite was ready for me. That's when everything exploded. The couple had heard him, and the woman came charging back like a bull seeing red. She demanded to know why I was getting a room when they had been turned away. The manager tried to explain that I had a confirmed reservation from 2 months ago, but she wasn't having any of it. She started screaming that she didn't care and that we were here first, claiming I was getting their room. I tried to apologize and explain that I'd made the reservation back in January for the conference week, but she called me a liar. She said nobody plans that far ahead and accused me of bribing the staff. She started screaming about how this was theft and discrimination. The manager tried to explain the situation again, but she wasn't listening. Her boyfriend looked mortified and kept apologizing for her behavior, saying she was just upset about the drive. But the woman wasn't done. She started pointing at me and shouting about how I was stealing their room and how the hotel was running some kind of scam. Then, out of nowhere, she swung her leg at me. I jumped back and she ended up kicking my suitcase instead. That's when the manager hit the panic button. Within 5 minutes, 2 police officers walked through the front doors. One of them asked what the problem was, and the woman immediately demanded that I be arrested for stealing their hotel room. The officers separated us and started taking statements. When they got to me, I just handed over my printed reservation confirmation and explained that I was there on business with a reservation from January. I also told them I didn't want to press charges for the attempted assault. One of the officers told the woman that she needed to leave the premises immediately or she'd be arrested for trespassing, but she refused to go and declared that she wasn't leaving without her room. She said she was entitled to a room there. Her boyfriend was now telling her to shut up and just leave, but she kept going. She started screaming at the officers about how this was all a conspiracy and how they were all corrupt. Then she made the biggest mistake of her life. She hauled off and slapped one of the officers right across the face. What happened next was like watching a movie in fast forward. The officer spun her around, slapped handcuffs on her wrists, and had her walked out to the patrol car in under a minute. The second officer immediately turned to her boyfriend, who threw his hands up in the air, and declared that he wasn't with her. He explained that he'd just met her on a dating app the day before. He kept apologizing while he practically ran out of the lobby. Through the window, I could see the woman in the back of the police car, crying and apparently still arguing with the officers. The manager gave me free breakfast for the week and personally walked me to my suite. The rest of my stay was completely peaceful, and I never saw that couple again. I did hear from the manager later that the woman spent the night in jail and got charged with assault on a police officer. Crowds make me uncomfortable, small talk drains me, and I'd rather spend my evening reading than making conversation with strangers. My family knows this about me. It's not something new. My son just got married to his girlfriend. They're both 26 and I genuinely like her, or at least I thought I did before this whole mess started. They decided to have a big wedding with about 150 guests. When I heard the numbers, I already felt that familiar knot in my stomach. Big parties have never been my thing. A few weeks before the wedding, I sat down with my son to have an honest conversation. I told him that I wanted to be there for him on his big day, but he knew how I was with crowds. I explained that I'd definitely be there for the ceremony, but I might need to leave early from the reception. I asked if he understood. He nodded and said that was fine, that he got it. I mentioned that if his mom wanted to leave with me, that would be her choice. He agreed and said whatever worked for us was okay with him. We had an understanding. He seemed completely okay with it, and I felt relieved that there wouldn't be any drama. The wedding day came and the ceremony was beautiful. I was genuinely happy for them both. After the ceremony ended, I walked over to congratulate them. I told my son he did a great job and that everything looked wonderful. Then I mentioned that I was going to head out now. He asked if I could at least stay for the food or cake. I looked over at the buffet setup. The food didn't look particularly appealing to me, and honestly, I was already feeling overwhelmed by all the people and noise. I told him I'd just head home and thanked him anyway. He just shrugged and told me to go ahead. He seemed fine with it. No anger, no disappointment that I could see. Just a casual response giving me permission to leave. I went back to my table to gather my things and say goodbye to the relatives sitting there. My wife wasn't thrilled about the idea of driving home alone. The venue was quite far from our house and the roads weren't great. After talking it over, she decided to come with me. She said she wasn't comfortable driving back alone in the dark and would come with me instead. We said our goodbyes and left. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing with text messages. The first few were from my new daughter-in-law, and they were absolutely vicious. She texted that she was disgusted with both of us and that we had ruined their entire wedding. I texted back asking what she was talking about, reminding her that we had said goodbye before leaving. She responded by calling us selfish and inconsiderate, saying we had made everything about ourselves instead of supporting our son. The messages kept coming, each one nastier than the last. She called us names I won't repeat here and accused us of humiliating them in front of their guests. I was completely shocked. Where was this coming from? I sent her a message saying I didn't understand why she thought it was appropriate to speak to her in-laws this way, and that we had told her husband beforehand that we might leave early. She fired back that we always made excuses and that we were terrible parents who had proved it by walking out on our son's wedding. At this point, I'd had enough of her disrespect. I sent back a few choice words of my own because nobody talks to me like that, family or not. I decided to call my son to let him know what his wife was doing. I wasn't trying to start a fight, I just thought he should know how she was treating his parents. When I called, I told him I needed to talk to him about the messages his wife had been sending us. He immediately got defensive and said I always did this, that I always caused problems, and then acted like I was the victim. I asked him what he meant by always do this, reminding him that I had told him I might leave early and he had said it was fine. He told me to just leave him alone because he was tired of dealing with this, then hung up on me. I sat there staring at the phone, completely confused. What did he mean I always do this? I had been nothing but honest with him about my limitations when it comes to social events. Here's what I think happened. After we left, someone must have made comments about how the groom's parents weren't there for important moments. Maybe they noticed there was no mother-son dance, or that we weren't there for speeches or cake cutting. Maybe other relatives started asking where we were. I think my son got embarrassed, and instead of explaining that he knew we might leave early, he decided it was easier to blame us. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. Yes, I know I missed some traditional wedding moments. Yes, I know they probably paid for our meals that we didn't eat. But I had been completely upfront about my intentions. If having us there for the entire reception was so important, why didn't he say so when I asked? I started asking other family members what they thought. Most of them were honest with me. My brother said he understood I wasn't a party person, but it was my son's wedding day, and maybe I could have pushed through it for a few more hours. My sister told me she understood I had told him ahead of time, but leaving right after the ceremony did look pretty bad, and people definitely noticed. The comments stung because I realized they had a point. Even though I had permission to leave, maybe I should have considered how it would look to everyone else. Maybe I should have thought about what moments I was missing. But what really bothered me was the disrespect from my new daughter-in-law. Even if she was upset, did she really think it was okay to send me nasty messages calling me names? And my son taking her side instead of having a calm conversation about what went wrong. A week later, my wife tried to reach out to smooth things over. She texted them saying we were sorry if our leaving upset them and that we didn't realize it would be such a big deal. My daughter-in-law responded that sorry wasn't enough and that we had showed our true colors. She said now they knew exactly who we were. My son added that they needed some space from us both right now. That was 3 weeks ago. We haven't spoken since. I've been going over the situation in my head constantly. On one hand, I did exactly what I said I would do. I was honest about my limitations and got permission to leave early. I showed up for the ceremony, congratulated them, and left politely. On the other hand, I'm starting to understand that maybe there's a difference between technically being in the right and doing what's best for your relationship with your child. Maybe sometimes you have to push past your comfort zone for the people you love, even when it's difficult. What really gets me is that if staying longer was so important to him, why didn't he just ask me to try? Instead of giving me casual permission to leave, he could have explained that it was really important to him and asked if I could please try to stay a little longer. I would have listened. I would have found a way to make it work. But the way his wife handled this situation is unforgivable to me. You don't get to attack your in-laws with name-calling and insults just because you're upset. There are mature ways to handle conflict, and she chose the nuclear option instead. Now I'm stuck wondering if I'll ever have a relationship with my son again, or if I'll get to meet any future grandchildren. All because I left a party early after getting what I thought was permission to do so. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.